Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to another fascinating lecture brought to you by Chabad-Aleph, South Carolina. This is an incredible lecture that I have such incredible esteem for this person, and obviously so many survivors are just not around anymore. And to be able to be in a room, to be able to hear the story directly from a survivor is such an amazing and a special moment that I will never forget for the rest of my life. So before we begin, I'd like to thank several of the sponsors that helped make this evening possible. Our co-sponsor for this evening, the South Carolina Council on the Holocaust, Ellen and Fred Seidenberg, Charlotte and Ellen Kahn, Jen and Charles Kahn, Jerry Sue and Norman Arnold, Diana and Mike Arnold, Steve Anastasian, Lily and Bruce Filler, Gloria and Henry Goldberg, Andy Helfer, Jane and Dave Kolbersh, Dr. Arnie Levine, Laurie Walden, and I hope I didn't leave anybody out. So the schedule of events are as follows. Our lecturer will speak for about 30 minutes, followed by an interview from Jack Swerling. He's going to ask a bunch of questions and hopefully get lots of the story that we would like to hear. If you would like to ask a question, please make sure to use the pen and index card that you got at registration, or you saw at registration, or borrow it from someone else, and you can ask a question. You pass those cards to me or to Rabbi Hash, the guys that look like us, and then we will pass it on to the interviewer, to the moderator. If you have a cell phone, please turn it on silent or on vibrate so that we don't disturb the lecture. Books. There are books that will be signed that are for sale at the end of the evening, and that will be done at the registration table. Tonight's lecture is a story of survival, revolt, and escape from a Nazi death camp, and especially in light of the horrible tragedies of the past week, we look to our speaker tonight for Jewish courage and hope. Mr. Bialowitz helped execute the uprising and liberation of hundreds of prisoners and slave laborers from the infamous Nazi death camp called Sobibor, where more than 250,000 people perished between 1942 and 1943. I'm deeply honored to welcome Mr. Philip Bialowitz. Philip, please come forward.
Good evening, everybody. It is my privilege and honor to be here with you tonight. Before I begin, I would like to thank everybody at Chabad of South Carolina, and particularly Rabbi Levi, for everything he was done to make my visit here tonight possible, and for promoting Yiddishkeit and goodwill here in Columbia. I have been invited here tonight to speak about a topic that holds so much emotion for me personally and so much important to today's world. Unfortunately, we live in a world where little has changed since the Holocaust. Our world is still profoundly broken. People hate instead of love their neighbors. Our work of fixing the world continues even after the Holocaust. But with so many problems, where do we begin? We must always start with education. The Jewish tradition teaches that the world is sustained by the bread of school children. That is why when the Germans came to my town, and the Germans prohibited the public schooling of Jews, my parents make sure that I received lessons from a private tutor. As I look around this room, I am grateful to see the faces of so many students. Among the 6 million Jews who were murdered during the Holocaust, there were 1.5 million children. No child should ever have to experience the suffering that they went through. That is the main reason why I am here in front of you tonight. I hope that my story will serve as both a warning and an inspiration to all of you. I hope that after hearing my story, everyone here will be inspired to do all that he can to prevent suffering anywhere in the world at any time. I am going to share with you the story of the torment I experienced after coming to Sobibor. Then I will also share with you how I, along with my brother and our fellow prisoners, regained our freedom and dignity. This past year marked the 71st anniversary of two important and heroic chapters in the Jewish history: the Warsaw Ghetto uprising and the revolt at Sobibor. The largest single revolt by Jews during the Holocaust took place inside the walls of the Warsaw Ghetto, and the revolt at Sobibor was the site of the most successful prisoner uprising in any World War II death camp. The Warsaw Ghetto uprising and the revolt of Sobibor stands as a symbol of all the places where Jews fought for their life and their dignity. I am a survivor of one of these places, the infamous Sobibor death camp, where 250,000 Jews were murdered, including most of my family. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you the story as I know it really was, as I lived it, and as I survived it. I was born into a religious family in a small town in Poland named Izbica. I had 5 brothers and sisters, but by the time I was 14, my childhood was lost forever. My parents and one of my sisters had already been murdered by the Nazis. I myself had already escaped death several times in the Jewish ghetto established by the Germans in my town. One day I was put in front of a firing squad along with a dozen of other Jews. As soon as I heard the gunshot, I fell to the ground. Dead and dying people fell on top of me. I found a space to breathe, and I played dead until the killers left. I survived that day. Eventually I was caught by the Germans and taken to Sobibor with the remaining members of my family. Before describing my experience in Sobibor, I must explain an important point. In concentration camps such as Mauthausen, Dachau and Buchenwald, the Germans enslaved and tortured political prisoners, including Jews, but as long as you were able to walk, you had a chance to survive. Sobibor, on the other hand, was not a concentration camp or a labor camp. It was a pure extermination camp. 99% of the Jews who entered Sobibor were sent to the gas chambers immediately. I and my family knew that Sobibor was a place of death. So when I arrived, I said to myself, after going through all so many terrible experiences in the ghetto in my town, at least if they kill me, it will be my end and I can have some peace. But at the same time, I was only a teenager and I wanted to live. As it turned out, I was saved by a miracle. On a normal day, I would have been killed just like all of the other Jews who arrived at Sobibor. The only Jews allowed to live in Sobibor were the camp's 600 slave laborers. Normally, they survived for just a few months before they too were murdered and replaced by new prisoners. I was lucky to arrive in Sobibor one day when the Nazis needed to replace 40 Jewish slaves who they had killed the day before. A German officer asked if there were any professionals or tradespeople among us. My older brother grabbed my hand and pulled me over forward with him. He told the German that he was a pharmacist and I was his assistant. The officer gave his approval and told us to stand to the side where other tradespeople stood. And that is how my brother saved me from being sent to the gas chambers along with almost everyone he came with, including my niece and two sisters. With tears in our eyes, my brother and I said goodbye to our two sisters and our niece for the final time. My niece was only 7 years old, but even she knew that she was going to die, and she came to me to hug me. The next day, my brother told me that he found a neighbor from our hometown working in the camp. The neighbor told my brother that he had cut the hair of our sister before she went to the gas chambers. He said that our sister recognized him, and her last words to him were, "How long will the gas take to kill us?" Our neighbor was not allowed to say a single word to our sister. I could barely stand to think about how afraid my sister must have been, and how much she must have suffered. But I was to be reminded of my sister's agony over and over, because soon the Germans forced me to cut the hair of other women prior to entering the gas chambers. Another task I was forced to do was to help victims of the trains on their way to the gas chambers. Based on what I saw, I can explain why didn't they fight back. Many of the 250,000 Jews who were gassed in Sobibor were simply too sick and weak to offer any resistance. But many victims, especially the 35,000 Dutch Jews killed in Sobibor, had also been deceived by the Germans. The Germans had convinced the Dutch Jews that they were being resettled in a war camp. As they stepped down from the train, pleasant waltz music played over the loudspeaker. A group of neatly uniformed Jewish prisoners in blue overalls opened the wagon doors. I was one of them. Our task was to help the newcomers with their heavy baggage. I noticed that the passengers were tired but glad that their long journey was over. So being met by young, healthy boys like me in a green station must have seemed to them like a sign of good things to come. When I helped the Jewish passengers with their bags, some of them offered me a tip for my services. My heart was bleeding because I knew what they did not know. I knew that in a half hour, the hundreds of human beings in front of me were all going to be murdered and reduced to ashes. Leaving their heavy luggage behind, a column of men and women carrying babies with children close behind moved quickly through the barbed wire alley to a large room. They were ordered to leave their purses in small hand luggage. Here they must have become a little suspicious. Their private papers, money, jewelry, and medicine were inside, and they were hesitating to part with their important and precious articles. When polite explanation failed to bring results, they were beaten by the Germans. The moment the room was empty, a group of prisoners very quickly removed the baggage to adjoining barracks. Here, prisoners, including me, would spend the next few days sorting and searching the baggage for hidden valuables. Meanwhile, the Jews led to a partly covered yard. Here they were to experience the height in satanic deception. Standing on a porch of a house, a German in a quiet and convincing voice welcomed the victims. He sympathetically apologized for the inconvenience and trouble, for the fact that it cannot go to their quarters to relax. First, for sanitary reasons, you must take a shower and be disinfected. Now he strongly recommended that they pick up the waiting postcards and ride home to their loved ones in Holland, reassuring them of their health and the settlement in a decent place. The soothing speech by the polite assessment has its effect. There was some hand clapping and some people even yelled bravo. People rushed for the postcards. After the postcards were written and collected, a polite order was given to undress. When ready, they were led from the undressing yard to a narrow barbed wire alley. At the entrance to the kiosk, where a German collected watches and jewelry from those passing by, giving them fictitious number receipts to pick up on return. Now they would have their hair cut by me and other workers before walking towards the showers. I remember some of the women politely asking me not to cut their hair too short. They still had no idea that the showers were really gas chambers. On arrival at the gas chambers, they were brutally and tightly packed into the 12 by 12 cubicles. Probably then they sensed something wrong. But I am convinced they did not fully realize the terrible truth until the first breath of poison gas. From a heavy engine housed in an adjoining shack, the gas streamed in. Soon throughout the camp we heard the roar of a motor, mixed with a horrible west scream, at first loud and strong, then gradually subsiding. 15 minutes later, a contrasting silence took over. By this time, the next load of people were on their way to the yard for the same speech. Day after day, it went on like this. During the 6 months that I had spent in Sobibor, I experienced many terrible things. I was beaten, I was whipped, I watched my family and friends perish. Some people suffered so much that they gave up on life and committed suicide. But I and many other prisoners lived for the chance to stand up to the Germans, to escape, and to tell the world of the atrocities committed at Sobibor. At first, many of us resisted by sabotaging the Germans in small ways. For example, the Germans forced us to sort through the belongings of the people who had been killed in the gas chambers. We were ordered to place any money or valuables into a large German safe. But I did not want to help the German war machine. So I went to the outhouse and threw away most of the precious items. We also resisted by helping others to live. Sometimes I found food, I would share this with my friends. One day my friend Mordechai asked me if I could give him a package of groceries. I gladly gave this food to Mordechai, but then I watched out the window as a German officer named Sergeant Frenzel cut my friend with his stolen food. As they began walking to the direction of the area, I ran to the outhouse to hide. Then I heard my name being called on the loudspeaker. I thought this was the end of my life. I had no choice but to return and face the consequences. I found my co-workers standing in group around Frenzel and Mordechai. My friend was shaking all over his body. Frenzel asked Mordechai, "Who gave this to you?" Mordechai said that he took it himself. By saying that, my friend gave up his life for me. Frenzel led Mordechai away. A half hour later, we were sorting through my friend's clothing, belongings. He didn't sleep in the prisoner's barracks anymore after that. Although Mordechai was only a teenager, he saved my life by sacrificing his own. The ultimate form of resistance was to escape from Sobibor, and we thought about this often. But Sobibor was surrounded by barbed wire, guard towers, and a deep forest. It was also the only death camp surrounded by minefields. Still, a seed of resistance grew among a small group of prisoners that included my brother and me. We knew the Germans planned to kill us, that our only chance to escape was to risk our life in a revolt. death by bullet would be preferable to death by gas. The conspiracy was led by a rabbi son named Leon Feldhandler. It was Leon who decided that the escape must be planned not only for a few prisoners, but for everyone in the entire camp. It was because any prisoners left behind would have been tortured and killed. So our goal was to develop an escape plan for all 600 prisoners in the camp to leave no one behind. The main thing that we needed for such a bold plan was military know-how. But we were only Jews who had never fought before. Then we were blessed by a miracle. In September of 1943, many Soviet prisoners of war arrived at Sobibor still wearing their Red Army uniforms. They had been sent to Sobibor by the Germans because they were all Jewish soldiers in the Soviet army. Because of the heavy workload associated with the processing thousands of gas chamber victims to hold the camp, the Germans selected about 60 of the strongest Soviet Jewish soldiers to help us. This decision was deadly for the Germans. We were lacking people trained in the art of warfare. The Soviet Jewish soldiers gave us exactly what we needed, people with military backgrounds. The leader of these Soviet Jewish prisoners was a young lieutenant named Sasha Pichowski. Our leader Leon approached Sasha. Within a few weeks, they masterminded a prisoner revolt that would be carried out by 40 conspirators, including me and my brother, and would hopefully free all the prisoners, 600 prisoners. We carried out the escape in 2 phases. In the first phase, we secretly eliminated key Germans in less than 60 minutes without interrupting the regular functioning of the camp. For this phase, we capitalized on the greed and punctuality of the German officers. Teenage boys, including me, were used as messengers to tell the individual German officers that we had found valuable items for them, such as leather coats and boots. We then made appointment with them to go into the workshop to try on their coats and boots. Once inside, combat groups of 3 Jews used knives and axes to kill each officer. On the day of the revolt, I watched as one of the German officers entered the storeroom to be killed. I waited a few minutes, then I went to the room eager to find out what happened. I saw the German officer on the ground, dead, covered in blood, with my brother and 2 Russian Jewish soldiers dragging him behind the walls to hide him. I felt a rush of happiness. I said to myself, this is for my sister, my niece, and the thousands of others who perished in the gas chambers. Whatever happened, at least I have some satisfaction knowing that we have taken vengeance. In total, we killed 11 SS men, and several Ukrainian guards were also killed. Our group also cut the telephone wires and electricity lines that the remaining Germans could not call for reinforcement. The second phase began at roll call, when Sasha and Leon revealed the conspiracy to everyone. The 2 of them stood at the table in front of the courtyard and called out, "Brothers, our moment of destiny has come. Most of the Germans have been killed. Let's rise and destroy this place. We have little chance of surviving, but at least we will die fighting with honor. If anyone survives, bear witness. Tell the world what happened here." With stolen weapons on hands, hundreds of prisoners rushed towards the fences and then towards the forest. When we were finally armed with a few pistols, machine guns, knives, and axes, we were no longer powerless. We were shooting back, and the remaining German kept their distance. However, several Ukrainian guards still manned the guard towers with their machine guns. The machine guns scored of us, before a few of us silenced them with our own guns. As I climbed the barbed wire fences, my finger was sliced. The scar remains today. After getting past the fences, we still had to make it through the minefields before reaching the forest. The air was filled with sounds of smoke and exploding mines. I guess that it might be safest to run alongside some of the buildings erected by the Germans at the edge of the minefields. I believe that they would not place mines there, we could damage their property. I was right. I made it to the deep forest where I met up with my brother. About 400 prisoners died as a result of the revolt, but about 200 other prisoners, including my brother, made it to the deep forest. The escape from Sobibor was not the last chapter in anybody's journey to freedom. All of us still had to live for about a year as partisans or in hiding until we were liberated by the Russian army. Only 42 of the 200 Jews who escaped from Sobibor survived until the end of the war. I was only saved because of a heroic Catholic Polish family named the Mazureks. They lived in a small farm and they risked their lives to hide me and my brother in their barn. Despite the fact that 250,000 Jews perished in Sobibor, in no camp did we fight more successfully than there. The mass prisoner uprising in Sobibor will go in the annals in history as an act of heroism second in scope only to the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. At Sobibor, the Nazis suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of untrained, ill-fed, and virtually unarmed Jews. The story of the tens of thousands of Jews who died at Sobibor and the few who survived are stories of both suffering and triumph. They are also stories of gratitude. I owe my life to many people, but I owe most of the Sasha Pichowski and Leon Felendler. They were the mastermind of the unbelievable plot that gave us and 600 other people a second chance at life. In a time when it was difficult to gather the strength to go on living, Sasha and Leon inspired me and hundreds of others with the will to live, and they led us to freedom. With our faith in God, we fought for our lives and for the chance to warn others about Sobibor. As I stand before you, I again recall the words that Sasha Pichowski used to inspire us before the escape began. If anyone has survived, bear witness, tell the world what happened here. Here I am, Sasha, a living witness to all the horror and triumph of history that were both very real. I have dedicated my life to telling the story of the innocent people who perished in the middle of a forest hidden from the conscience of the world. And I also tell the story of how I have a few survivors because of our lack in our fighting spirit and the courage of others. But my survival means very little if Hitler's legacy of genocide lives on. At Sobibor, we did not only fight for our lives, we also fought for a better tomorrow, a better future, a world without hatred and a world without genocide. My life and the lives of my 5 children and 15 grandchildren are part of the better world. But despite the fact that I helped to destroy the Sobibor of the Germans, others have built new Sobibors. The systematic murder of innocent human beings continues even in the 21st century. Genocide still takes place in parts of Africa where hundreds of thousands of human beings have been murdered in recent years only because of their race. In the Middle East, the powerful leaders of Iran are threatening genocide against the Jewish people. And our greatest fear is that they will all use nuclear weapons in the same way that Hitler used gas chambers. As peaceful people and human beings, we must strongly condemn those men as we condemned Hitler. Of course, we hope that our condemnation will stop hatred and genocide. But in the places like Sobibor, we learn that sometimes we must stand up for ourselves and defend the helpless. The Allied forces could have saved millions of people by simply bombing the railroad tracks that led to the extermination camps. Prisoners like me even prayed that the passing warplanes would drop bombs directly on top of us. We felt that even if we were killed by the bombs, at least the gas chambers could have been destroyed. While I am grateful to everyone who fought against the Axis powers to eventually free us, I will always wonder why